This is the historic Cherokee Trail. Cherokee and white immigrants together blazed the trail during the 1849 California Gold Rush. They traveled from Oklahoma into Kansas along the Santa Fe Trail to Bent's Fort in Colorado, where they followed a trapper's trail across Colorado's Front Range into Wyoming. There, they joined the California Trail at Fort Bridger. These stories will give you a glimpse into immigrant life, their journeys, trials and tribulations, why they sought out a new life and new riches traveling through Colorado. Join us as you see history unfold.
I'm Ken Jessen, and I'm standing in front of the 1862 Virginia Dale Stage Station along the Overland Trail, and I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the characters involved with the stage station, and that is Jack Slade. He was a supervisor on the Overland, and he was a very competent manager. He managed roughly 500 miles of the Overland, and they started having some problems at one of the stations, and this involved a Frenchman by the name of Jules Beni. And Jules founded a town that still exists today. It's called Julesburg, but some of the horses started disappearing. And you cannot run a stagecoach company without horses. It is absolutely essential. So Slade, being the supervisor, and this being included on his route, he was sent out to determine what's going on. And what he discovered was that Jules was somehow made the horses disappear, and then suddenly the horses would come back. The Overland would offer a reward of some sort, and Jules would pay the reward for it, and by heck, some of that money probably ended up in the pockets of Jules. And when Slade got to Julesburg, Jules decided that to put an end to this inquiry. So he shot Slade 6 times with a revolver and then finished him off with a shotgun blast. And somehow Slade survived all of this, amazingly enough. Now, Jules did something very logical. He had his men start building a coffin, because no one could ever survive 6 bullets in a shotgun blast. And so, but Slade lived on. And he was taken back to Horse Creek, and he lived there under the care of his men, and what he lived on was cow's milk. And eventually he recovered. And so, he was going to get even. I mean, being shot that many times, he was going to get even. So he sent his men out to Julesburg to find Jules Beni. And he offered a reward for bringing Jules back alive. But during the time that they were trying to capture Jules, he died. And he was brought back on horseback all the way to Horse Creek. It's quite a long distance. And they wanted to collect the money that Slade was offering, so they propped Jules up against a corral post and told Slade that he was just paying possum, that he actually was alive. So to test this, Slade took out his knife and he cut off one of Jules' ears, and Jules didn't flinch. And so Slade knew he was dead. So he cut the other ear off, and here's one of the ears. And he dried the ears out and carried these dried ears with him, and he'd go into a bar and he'd lay down these ears and order a drink. And later on, he ran across an immigrant, and the immigrant had a child with him, and the child was crying. So he took a few pebbles up, and he put some pebbles in that ear and gave it to the child as a rattle to try to calm the child down. But in the meantime, in 1862, the indigenous people took umbrage to having their land taken away without any compensation. So Holiday basically was forced to move the Overland from across Wyoming down through Colorado. But Holliday was a businessman, and he saw this growth down in Denver. He saw all of the mining activity, and he knew that this area in Colorado, south towards Denver, would become an economic hub, unlike the Oregon Trail across Wyoming. So Slade was charged with finding locations for the swing stations where the stagecoaches would swing in, the horses would be changed, but also he needed a home station. And Slade picked this place. You have Dale Creek over here. Slade's wife's name was Virginia, so he combined that Virginia Dale, and this became Virginia Dale. And so Slade supervised the construction of this beautiful stage station. I think it's the only one in its original condition and its original location on the Overland. But Slade was an alcoholic. In modern times, he would have been sent to an alcoholic treatment program. He was a tremendous manager. They had high regards, but he did a lot of things when he was drunk. He was a gentleman when he was sober. He was a terror when he was drunk. And he did things like shoot down in through the bottom to the top of stagecoaches, frighten the passengers. He picked on one man that sold whiskey to his drivers. Now that's kind of ironic for an alcoholic to pick on a man selling whiskey to his drivers. And eventually the Overland fired him. In fact, he was actually put in jail. So Virginia and Slade moved to Virginia City, Montana. And he became a hero when he rescued people there from starvation and went out and brought back food for them in Alder Gulch. He also operated a ranch. And in addition to that, he had a toll road that he built. So he was a very reputable person, but when drunk, he was a holy terror. He would ride into a saloon on the horseback, and he'd shoot out the chandeliers inside the saloon. So the vigilantes had enough of Slade, and they hanged him. And Virginia got there too late to try to save her husband. And she did something rather interesting. She had a metal coffin made with soldered seams and put Slade's body in that coffin and ironically filled the coffin with whiskey, which seems just absolutely incredible. You can't make this stuff up. Sealed the coffin up, and eventually that coffin with the whiskey sloshing around in it was taken by wagon to the city cemetery in Salt Lake City. It's in City Creek, and Slade was buried in the paupers area. And eventually somebody came along and marked the grave. And we don't know really whether or not Slade's body is actually in that marking. But the long-distance stage travel came to an end. In 1867, the Union Pacific came through Julesburg. In 1870, a line was built directly from Cheyenne down to Denver. And that pretty well ended stage travel.